Hello, everybody, and welcome to Madden and Benz Unfiltered. Mark Madden and me, Tim Benz, with you, as always, here on the Trib Live Facebook stream and on YouTube as well. Here is the latest surrounding the Aaron Rodgers situation with the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you didn't hear it today, DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers were actually having a throwing session together, apparently over the weekend at UCLA. Mark, what are we doing here? Like, is basically Aaron Rodgers trying to talk himself into this job or talk himself out of it at this point? I'm getting confused.
Well, the two phrases that come to mind for me readily are don't know, don't care. This has just gone on absurdly long. The Steelers, I'm not going to say they look bad because, it's Aaron Rodgers' right to dictate his timetable, but it's also the Steelers' right to dictate theirs, and they're totally acquiescing to Aaron Rodgers in that regard. I think it's an awful long time to wait and an awful big fuss being made, albeit not by the Steelers, for a quarterback that won't get them any further than Russell Wilson did last year.
I never want to hear again, if they just blow off the OTAs and minicamp, how important those sessions are if they just go right to training camp and not have Aaron Rodgers report before then and try to talk about how important it is for everybody else. He's the quarterback, for crying out loud. He should be there.
The quarterback coming to a new team with a new playbook,
right,
with a new coordinator, with different receivers. Yeah, hell yeah, he should be there. And if I'm like a Steeler veteran, if I'm like a Cam Hayward, who I don't think is enamored with the idea of Aaron Rodgers coming to this team, if I'm Cam, I say, listen, I'm not going to make OTAs or minicamp. They're apparently not mandatory, so count me out. I'm old.
I think this is sort of a normalization process, Mark. I've been down this path with you before. I think you might maybe feel I'm a little too conspiratorial on this, but I do think there's something from a Steelers point of view of let's naturalize this for everybody. Let's get people used to the idea of Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback. But I wonder if there's a handshake agreement under the table here between Rodgers and the Steelers. Like, look, I'm coming, but I'm not coming in June. I'm not going to get there until Latrobe at the earliest, so people can get used to this idea. Or maybe it's just me showing up on a white horse and arriving in July to make everything better.
Given, for example, Adam Schefter's proclivity to report things out of his rectum, if that was even a whisper anywhere, a guy like him would be going with it as fact, or at least the possibility, and he is not. So no, I don't think there's any kind of handshake agreement in place.
That said, though, it does kind of act as a solve in advance, does it not, for him not being there? Like, hey, he's not signed. What can we tell you? He's not coming. He's not signed. We don't have an agreement. It's easy to do that and then just have him show up on Route 30 in a couple months.
I think Aaron Rodgers has determined that for the rest of his career, whatever's left of it and wherever he does go to play, he is not attending OTAs or minicamp ever again. That's just not something he wants to do. Look at last year when he was under contract to the Jets and he blew off mandatory minicamp to go to Egypt, which, of course, is exactly why he's the guy you don't want. I mean, all this you're describing, the Steelers normalizing his schedule, his timetable to not do stuff like OTAs and minicamp, it's exactly why you shouldn't want it.
Mark, with what Tomlin said yesterday when he was answering reporters' questions in Florida about plan A, plan B, plan C, like he was asked what happens if Rodgers doesn't come. What's the plan? What's the sequence? He said that there wasn't one. And I think that's a perfect summation. I feel like there hasn't been one since free agency opened. I feel like there wasn't one in advance of free agency, or if there was one, plan A is already gone. I mean, the way Art Rooney II was talking back in January, plan A was either Russ or Justin Fields. Now, if they didn't keep Fields because the Jets outbeat him, okay, that happens. I get it. But it strikes me that just having Russell Wilson as part of that plan was strictly an Art Rooney thing, and it was never a Tomlin or Arthur Smith thing, or Omar Khan for that matter.
Well, it's amazing how the national media in particular, and local too, really, how they twist the narrative to always give the Steelers the benefit of the doubt. I just a few minutes ago heard Bart Scott on ESPN say, well, the Steelers failed to sign Justin Fields. They failed to sign Russell Wilson. No, they just didn't want to sign Russell Wilson. He wanted to come back. He's on record as saying that. They just didn't want him. But that's the excuse for having their quarterback situation in disarray, that they couldn't sign this guy, couldn't sign the other guy, even though the other guy wanted to stay a Pittsburgh Steeler. It is in total dishevelment. I don't think there's a plan beyond them believing in all their hubris, with all their typical hypocycloid arrogance. Why wouldn't Aaron Rodgers want to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers? We're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame quarterback, legendary logo and organization. Of course he's going to want to play here. I really do believe they're telling themselves that.
I can't see Shedeur slipping to them, and I can't justify using a number 21 pick on any of the other quarterbacks. And then they don't have the second pick. It doesn't sound like they're going to trade George Pickens to get it back. So, Mark, as far as filling the void, if they don't get Rodgers, I don't know what they do unless they hope that Jackson Dart or Tyler Shuck is there in round 3, and then you're waiting on a running back until day 4. So they're kind of boxed in here.
It wouldn't shock me at all if they panic drafted, say, a Jackson Dart, a quarterback, whoever's there with the 21st pick. If Rodgers isn't signed by then, that would not shock me at all.
I think that's how you could qualify it then, because I haven't heard a lot of other people talking about those two quarterbacks, or even a Will Howard or one of these other guys that have been thrown around as prospects. I haven't heard a lot of other people talking about them in the late first round. It seems like it's Pittsburgh or no one else for those QBs after pick 15 or so.
Yeah, nobody was talking about Kenny Pickett in the first round either.
Well, there was some talk like the Eagles here, the Saints here. Not the Eagles, the Saints. Who else am I forgetting? There's another team that was in the mix there. Carolina was sort of in the mix on him as well.
But at the end of the day, none of those teams would have drafted Kenny Pickett in the first round. Only the Steelers would have, and of course, unfortunately, did.
Right, and that, of course, has been part of the whole gingerbread crumb thing that set them back when it comes to where they are now quarterback-wise, because you kind of do the butterfly effect there, Mark, as it relates to where they are now and what happened when they took Kenny Pickett a couple years ago. That reset the clock on them trying to get back on pace with the quarterback.
Didn't just set back the clock at quarterback, set back the clock for the entire team.
What about running back, Mark? Tomlin talked about that too. Are they just going to go with Warren and Gainwell, or like they really have a plan there? Is this also just kind of feeling their way through the dark?
Tim, their only plan is that they're the Steelers and they hope that's enough. That's their only plan. This organization is an absolute joke, and I wish more people would speak as frankly as I am about it.
I think one thing that's really been highlighted is the lack of continuity in their messaging, particularly as related to Wilson. You know, like the actions between what Art Rooney II said in January and then not keeping Wilson, it's obvious that they were not on the same page in their thinking about who this guy was and what the terms were to bring him back.
Let me ask you this, Tim. Here's another thing Bart Scott said on ESPN, and I have it maybe too fresh in my memory because I'm quoting way too much from a guy who I guarantee does no research whatsoever before the camera gets put on. But he said, well, the Steelers are going to make the playoffs. We know that. They need a guy to get them over the top. Do you really assume they're going to make the playoffs this coming year?
No.
Is that automatic in your mind?
No, it's not automatic. And how could anyone possibly say that with a straight face? How do we know that the Steelers are going to make the playoffs when they lost 5 games in a row to end last season and they live on the bubble constantly? Like 9-10 wins is what it takes, and that's always where they are. It comes back to tiebreakers usually. That's a ridiculous statement. I have no idea if they're going to make the playoffs this year.
I like when Tomlin today, Tim, he's talking about how, well, the final 5 games showed us we weren't among the league's elite. Really? Do you think that's what it showed? And people quote this guy like he is reading from the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's a nitwit.
I thought his comments about where they stood in the sort of lexicon of the National Football League, the hierarchy, it again just speaks to me about where they think they're going versus where they really are. Like, and that Bart Scott thing sums it up too. they should be concerned about even struggling to be in the middle of the league next year, not being up with the big 5 or big 6 from both conferences.
Tim, if you made me pick right now, and I'm assuming Mason Rudolph's the quarterback because he's the only one on the roster, him and Skylar Thompson. If Rudolph's the quarterback, I'd pick them to win 8 or 9 games. But they're a lot closer to 6 wins than they are to 11. You know what I mean?
Well, I thought yeah, I do. And I thought you were actually trying to get to 5 maybe. And I actually didn't think you would be kidding on that. That's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I just when the real bad season comes, and it will come before it gets better, it is amazing that the majority out there will not see it coming.
What do you see coming for the Penguins in terms of how they finish things up here over the next month or so and what that does to their draft position?
Well, I really liked what we saw from Koivunen and McGroarty yesterday in McGroarty's return to the NHL. He played, 4 games early in the season, and Koivunen's NHL debut. Koivunen showed really good speed. He showed that Finnish kind of peckskiness on the forechecking around the puck. McGroarty was on Crosby's line and kept up very well. His skating is exponentially better than it was when we saw him at the beginning of the season. They were both used in top 6 roles and got over 15 minutes apiece, so they were used correctly. So that was a good first game for them. Well, return for McGroarty and first game for Koivunen. Jari could throw 100 shutouts in a row. I don't trust him, and he's not my goalie for next season, let alone for beyond that. I mean, maybe next season because you're carrying the contract and it's easier to dump Ned. I would have a veteran and probably Larson, their number 3 prospect in the NHL next year, and I would let Morishov and Blomqvist rotate in Wilkes, as will hopefully be the case up here in Pittsburgh at some point. But yeah, I don't put any stock in the results now. The best thing to do would be for them to lose and repeatedly between now and season's end. But I do think a decent plan is in place. The Penguins, unlike the Steelers, actually have a plan.
I think there are some Penguins fans out there, because Jari has showed flashes since he's gotten back up of like, oh no, what if he's a hockey Sam Darnold and they give up on him? They had a lot invested in him. They gave up on him, and then he goes and hits it big somewhere else. Well, then he does. Okay, that happens sometimes, but it's not up to the Penguins to constantly keep mining for it here, when I think they've done a pretty decent job of coming up with contingency plans to take his gig when he does leave.
Yeah, I think the goaltending is where they're safest moving forward. Not in the immediacy, not even next year, but I think it's where they're safest, where they have the most in the system. My one worry is that they try to accelerate the timetable to contend again to fit with Crosby's. And you can't do that. You can't force feed that. Otherwise, you might damage your plan. One thing I will say, though, I hear people keep saying that they're going to make a big run in free agency at somebody like a Marner this coming offseason. That would be okay. You could never go wrong by adding a Mitch Marner, who's relatively young and just a great, great player. I don't see him wanting to come to Pittsburgh, but that's one exception I would make to what I'm saying about not trying to accelerate the timetable, a player like that.
Are you tracking the Ovechkin thing sort of with the eye that a lot of Penguins fans are, in hopes that it crystallizes here in Pittsburgh at the end of the season?
I just sent a column about it to the Trib, Tim. What I'm rooting for on behalf of the NHL is that he comes up 1 goal short of tying, and they have the whole offseason to hype it, like Hank Aaron in 1974. That would be best for the league if the league could maximize it. But and you would figure that with Washington being the number 1 seed in the East, that Ovi would take some games off down the stretch to be more ready for the postseason. But that's not how he's going to think, and not how hockey players operate.
He certainly baby-faced himself a bunch coming to Pittsburgh potentially for that goal streak with the way he handled himself in the Fleury thing, don't you think?
Yeah, having all the Caps line up to shake Fleury's hand the last time that Ovi and the Caps played against Fleury, although Fleury did not actually play in that game. Gustafsson did, but for Minnesota. Yeah. But I think he was, seen as noble opponent, a worthy foe long before that. I don't think Pittsburgh even begrudged him the Stanley Cup he won in 2018 when it happened. And I think Pittsburgh wouldn't mind him breaking the goal record either. Although, as I said at the end of my column, this won't make him the greatest goal scorer ever. It makes him the guy with the most goals. The greatest goal scorers ever are, well, I saw Mario Lemieux and Mike Bossy, and I know they're better. And I'm going to assume Rocket Richard was too, because they named the daggum trophy after him.
Mark, as far as baseball goes, Pirates off to a lousy start. They got walked off 3 times against a nothing team in the Marlins. And a lot of the problems that we've all been concerned about, we've all talked about, came to light right away. The bullpen blowing games, the fielding with guys playing a bunch of different positions, the lack of base running, the lack of clutch hitting, all of these things that were talked about ad nauseum in advance of the season, they magnified right away and they materialized right away. And it's going to be that way for 162. I don't know why a lot of people try to talk themselves into thinking that this team was more than what it is.
You have a bunch of nitwits who don't know how to play baseball on the roster. You have a corresponding level nitwit managing the team. Boy, that doesn't sound like a recipe for disaster. And typical of the decision-making process is they rested O'Neal Cruz in the season's 4th game. They rested him. He's already exhausted. They rested him. Now, Tim, do they play today? I really don't know.
I don't know. I think they do because they're just going to Tampa, but it doesn't matter.
No, it goes to show we've already lost track of what's going on because they give you no reason to care about him. The guy I feel bad for is Bednar. He's clearly done.
They do play. They played 7:05. Majinski against Rasmussen. I'm sure the world will be watching.
Well, Cruz needed that rest then. I'm glad he's going to be up and at him for the game at Tampa Bay. Yeah, I feel bad for Bednar. He's clearly done so, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, the Bednar thing and Holderman too. Like they seem to have had some sort of stock emotionally and overall invested in Holderman, especially since I think they know what's going on with Bednar. They're just not going to say it out loud. And he figures out a way, even at times where stuff looks good, to lose a game or give up a lead or get 2 guys out, then give up a home run. It's just the same thing over and over again. And the one strength that they have, starting pitching, I think you might have made this comment. I'm not sure if it was you that said this, Mark, but they've managed to, for the first time in the franchise's existence, build a starting staff with the starting staff as the crown jewel of the organization. Even when they've been really good, they've never had the starting staff be the center point of the organization. They've always been about bats primarily. This is the first time in franchise history, really, where they built around the starting rotation, and it's never been less meaningful.
Well, not only that, it was the crown jewel, and they dismantled part of it. Whether involuntarily with Jones in his elbow or they traded Luis Ortiz, they took a strength and it got diminished. Whereas now it's just a kind of a meh starting rotation. But you're right about that, Tim. It was almost historical for a team that hasn't had any history for decades. How many Pirates pitchers in the Hall of Fame? I think you got to go back to like 1909 and Babe Adams. I mean, I don't think they have pitchers in the Hall of Fame, generally speaking.
No, they've got very few. I mean, you got to go back to Drabek to be the last Cy Young winner in 1990.
He ain't the Hall of Fame. Vernon
Yeah,
Law's not in the Hall of Fame. Steve Blass isn't in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was, something I remember writing about that on the anniversary of the 79 team. Like, we forget how great the starting pitching was in those last 3 games of that series to help them come back because we're so focused on the bats. But it's always been about the bats. Now the thing that actually is driving me the most crazy, Mark, is like this whole concept that they have of like positionless baseball. Like, I get positionless basketball, the way that game has changed. I get multi-position functionality, especially on defense in football. But in baseball, they treat their daily lineup like it's a softball team or a little league team. Like, Timmy, Joey, and Johnny didn't show up today. Okay, who can make the throw from third? It's like, have a guy play his natural position, for God's sake. Why do they keep doing this?
Well, they have arguably how many guys out of position, Tim? O'Neal Cruz in center. I don't think the shortstop is IKF's strongest position. Endy Rodriguez was playing first base and looked real bad doing it, but they think they know better. The one thing I do like, they've stolen 14 bases. That's pretty good. And at least acknowledges that without their power, they have to try to manufacture runs.
Yeah, and then they ran themselves into a couple outs yesterday. So even that, they kind of cut off their nose to spite their face.
Yeah, but if you're being consistently aggressive, I can live with that.
Let's get to some comments here. Eric says, how can anyone, even a novice baseball fan, not watch this bunch of buffoons and not pull their hair out? They can't even figure out basic fundamental stuff. No MLB team should ever perform like this group of harebrained dopes.
Well, I'm impressed that the guy spelled buffoon right. That's a pet peeve of mine, Tim. On social media, whenever a guy uses the term buffoon, it's generally spelled B-A-F-O-O-N, which is to say
buffoon
incorrectly, which means the
like
person
baboon?
who misspelled it is indeed a buffoon.
Eric adds, I know it's only 4 games in. This might be impetuous, but is it time to move on from Bednar or at least give him a long time out? I figured he'd get injured around this season. He just sort of looks finished and old. Well, yeah. You know what? I mean, they weren't committed to him in the first place. Like, they never really committed to him as the closer. They were acting like it was going to be by committee. Now I don't think they have a choice. It's just that the problem is the setup guys haven't been good either.
They probably should not have brought Bednar back. They should have instead brought Chapman back.
Richard says the meaningless, never had a losing season streak shouldn't matter to the Steelers organization, but unfortunately it does. You know what? Like, this guy just referred to it as like the organizational streak. Most people think of it as a Tomlin streak. And the fact is, it goes back to when Ben got drafted in 04.
It's a Ben streak. The streak is Ben's. Ben put the streak together, period.
You know, and I wish that the rest of the organization would understand that no one even recognizes the first couple of years before Tomlin came around to talk about that, so they shouldn't prioritize it either, to be honest with you.
Well, I think it's come to matter more than it should. I think that when you're bringing Aaron Rodgers in, when you pretty much should figure that the best he can do is maintain that streak and that's it, that's the list, you know, the streak means more than it should. And I had somebody say to me, a Steeler disciple, well, you know, Sid's 20-point streak, it's the same thing, 20-year points per game streak. No, it's not, because it's all about context. In that 20 years, Sid won how many individual awards and 3 Stanley Cups? Okay, the streak, when contextualized, that's when it has to mean something. Tomlin's streak is just empty silliness.
Joshua says Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, throwing session over the weekend. We all know it's going to happen. It's A-Rod's world, and we have to live in it. Well, they don't have to. They're choosing to.
Well, as I say repeatedly, Dan Rooney would not have waited. Chuck Noll would not have waited. Bill Cowher would not have waited. And I don't know what people think Aaron Rodgers is going to come in and do if he does play for the Steelers. I don't know why people would think that he can come in and resurrect himself and resurrect a mediocre team. I have no idea why people would think that.
Mark, I know that Tomlin said this. Do you agree with it or not? I mean, like, some of the stuff he said, kind of I rolled my eyes at or I disagreed with. I don't know that he's wrong about this when he said the Rodgers factor didn't necessarily erase what else they could have done in free agency. Like, do you think they would have made another big signing in free agency if they weren't waiting on Rodgers?
No, I do not. They just don't make big signings in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's actually being somewhat honest there. Like, maybe they would have just looked at a defensive lineman differently, like a specific guy. But it strikes me like they still could have had the cap room. Like, they're not going to break the bank on Rodgers, I don't think. They could have been in the market for one of those guys, but I never really heard that they were all that competitive on any of the defensive linemen of note anyway. I think they're trying to address that in the draft.
When I watched the little video on, like, you know, the little clips on Twitter of Tomlin at the breakfast meeting this morning, I was struck by, you look at him visually, it oozes from him. It drips how much he hates talking to the media, the contempt he has. And then Kamali fell asleep.
Yeah, I saw that too. How do you fall asleep when you're sitting that close to the guy who's speaking, by the way?
I probably would.
Michael says, what is the red line for Tomlin? Meaning, what has to happen for him to be fired by the Rooneys? At least one losing season and then another real bad one in a row, at least.
I disagree. I don't think he'll ever get fired no matter what. I think he could go 1-16 in consecutive seasons, and that would be normalized by saying, well, we finally get those good draft picks.
Rich says Tomlin is a walking thesaurus with no clue of practical application on how the words should be used. Massively overrated.
Yeah,
I don't know about his
true.
misuse of the words, but I know that whatever words he's speaking never come into fruition. At least they haven't for the last 8 years in terms of playoff success.
You know, people sometimes criticize me because I don't go to the Tomlin media gatherings. Tim, you'll recall, I went to the Cower ones. Not all the time, but I did go.
On occasion, I used to go there for specific ones, I think.
Yeah, I'd go maybe twice a year. And you know why I went? Because I didn't have total contempt for Cower.
He would also on occasion, like you never quite knew what you're going to get from Cower. You can kind of tell based on how the week went before what you're going to get from Tomlin every week.
Yeah, I just have no use for Tomlin. Not as a coach, not as a guy. I just loathe him. And
Alex says, I think
and we'll cover his remainder of his career accordingly.
Alex says, I think the plan all along is to draft a QB next year in Pittsburgh. It would be symbolic and a good story for the organization. This will be a buffer year played off as legitimate. Well, you know what? I get, and we're all talking about this. The draft is in 2026. I get it. Now, if they do decide to draft Jackson Dart and he's really good as a rookie, then no one's going to care. You know what I mean? Like that'll just be a storyline that disappears.
He won't play as a rookie.
I mean, it might happen by accident if Mason stinks or gets hurt or something like that. I mean, they bypassed Mason before. Why would this year be any different?
Don't forget, Tim, Ben Roethlisberger would not have started his rookie year had Tommy Maddox not been injured.
Mark, I hope the Pens don't take the bait on Jari and resign him. They can't get sucked into this false narrative that he's worth holding on to, right?
Resign him. He still has years to go in his contract. Get this guy out of here.
Yeah, it's not a matter of re-signing. It's just a matter of keeping, and it's a matter of does anybody else want him and take on the contract. That's the other thing.
My advice to you people is have some vague idea of what you're texting us about before you actually hit send.
Bill, lastly, we'll get to him. I'll get to two more, actually. Bill says Derek Shelton is just Ben Cherington's lackey, and Ben Cherington is Bob Nutting's lackey. The Pirates will be losers in perpetuity. I think what Nutting wants is a general manager who will carry out the marching orders, and what that general manager wants is a manager who will, in kind, on a daily basis, have the lineup reflect the analytics that he wants. That's why Cherington is in lockstep with Shelton.
Yeah, I always like when people say, well, they could have got Terry Francona, who came out of retirement to go manage Cincinnati, right? What would make anybody think that Terry Francona, despite being from New Brighton, what would make anybody think that he would want to come to this tragedy in Pittsburgh? That's like waking up in 1940 and saying, hey, I know, let's vacation in France. Let's go see Paris.
Jeremy says, Yankees are about to set records against the Pirates with those new bats. Have you seen the thing about the Yankees bats, Mark?
I love the new bats. You know what they are, Tim? I'll tell you what they are. They're the wooden version of the old-fashioned yellow wiffle ball bat.
There you go. Actually, did I tell you I was in the left field stands for the 3 homers on the 3 first pitches at Yankee Stadium this weekend?
No, but go ahead.
It was a blast. Like, I got tickets in advance knowing I was going to be out there for the Sweet 16, and there were plenty of seats available, like going into the week, and then the forecast changed, and it was going to be 77 and sunny in New York, and they had a massive walk-up. It was totally sold out. It was packed to the gills, and they hit 3 home runs on the first 3 pitches. Judge's was a moonshot. And, Mark, it was like the blackout in the 3rd inning of a game in March. People are throwing beer. It was unbelievably fun and entertaining for a baseball game.
That's what happens when you have a team that tries to win, albeit with just copious amounts of money. But
gobs of money, yes.
But Judge doesn't use the new bat, I don't think. But I love the new bats. I mean, Tim, they are the damn wiffle ball bat. They are. Look at them. Look at them. I'm surprised nobody's posted a graphic with one of those bats next to a wiffle ball bat. It's the same bat.
I'm still trying. Did you hear? I only heard peripherally about this, but how they're legal as opposed to like a regular bat? How are they getting around the rules with this?
I don't know how they'd be illegal. There's
don't you have to have it like? I thought the
There's a
barrel
limit
had
to,
to be no more than a
there's a
certain
limit to, like,
diameter.
weight. I mean, proportion. They've already been cleared.
Hey, speaking of New York, Mark, I'd not been to
Tim, it
Lombardi's
reminds me,
Pizza.
by the way, of Wonder Boy. Roy Hobbs is
Oh,
back.
yeah. Yes, that's right. You need and then what was the other one called? I forgot what it was called when Lightning Bolt or something like that. What was the one that the little kid gave him at the end?
The Savoy Special.
Savoy Special. That's what it was. Right. Yeah, he had the lightning bolt on it.
Remember the ESPN commercial, the parody did of that? With Harold Reynolds as Glenn Close? It was tremendous.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. And you know what? The other parody that I saw recently that came across my feed with March Madness going on was the great old Chris Farley when he was replicating the Christian Laettner shot. Do you remember that one?
Right. Tremendous.
And he went through all the cardboard and he missed the layup and he got it back. Rebound! And then he put the layup back in again, just like it happened.
Farley was foolproof. You know what skit I watch all the time?
What's that?
The motivational speaker.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Matt Foley. Yeah, that's
my favorite moment, that among many, is when he goes to Christina Applegate. How about you, young lady? What do you want to do with your life? And she says, I want to live in a van down by the river, which totally double crosses him.
All right, so Mark and I, look, we'll be back. You're going, to Vegas here this week for Motley Crue, right? And then you're going to Liverpool after that?
Correct. I mean, I'll be home between. So, yeah. No, Motley Crue pushed back the residency. I'll be going now to pretty much booze and eat and see Jefferson Starship and go to a Knights game.
So we will be on next week. We'll figure out a way to try to make that work. Might be off the next week thereafter, but we'll duck and dodge through the travel schedules. I'll be on for Mark a bunch with Tom over the course of the next week, but Mark is in today. So listen to Mark before he goes on vacation, 2 to 6 on 105.9 The X, your flagship for the Pens. And I'll be talking to you a bunch this week with Tom. So be listening all the way through until Friday. And we're back with you on Madden Benz Unfiltered. The Madden Monday podcast is up at Trib Live. Check us out next week here.